Okay, guys, let's talk about Maynard Keynes. He's something. So a little bit of heads up. This has got to be the most. I know these videos are about as tedious as they get, but the Keynes video, I can see ahead into the future, and it's going to put you to sleep. So what I've done is gotten myself a cup of coffee. I'd advise you to do the same. So hold on tight because this is going to be sleep inducing. So stick with me though. But once you understand Keynes, the amazing thing is you understand all those things you've heard about but didn't really know why the Federal Reserve matters. Why things like deficits and inflation, indeed, why it's not just about gas prices. You're going to see there are remarkable implications of these issues. But you can only get it from Keynes. You will not. You're going to see that Marx and Smith play out in Keynes, but you're not going to catch it as far as how it plays out today in today's economy, unless you get Keynes. And there's another gentleman by the name of Hayek, and both of them really got how it played out. And these were two of the economists of the 20th century, and we're living in their world. If you think back to the crisis that happened in 2008 with housing, and it brought down the banks, and why was this such a huge crisis? And then you suddenly realize we're living in Keynes's world. We are, at least, and Europe was living in a Hayekian world. So, and what did that mean? Why did that play out? So let me walk through Keynes, and good idea to have it out and to take another sip of coffee. Okay, stick with me. I'm going to walk through Keynes with you now, okay? Let me hold your hand. And one thing to keep in mind is that Keynes is going to address the crisis that Marx picked up on. That there was a production in the production and classes produced by production. This was at the end of, let's see if we can find this. At the end of Marx, he says, in depicting the most general phases, this is paragraph 52, the most general phases of the development of the proletariat, we traced the more or less veiled civil war raging within existing society up to the point where that war breaks out into open revolution. That's what Marx thought was going to happen. He thought everybody was going to realize, man, you're getting a bum deal and you're going to go get your pitchforks and light some of those bourgeoisie on fire. That's what he thought was going to be the natural growth of what was happening in industrialization. And he had every reason to believe it because people were getting pissed off. The essential conditions for the existence and for the sway of the bourgeois class is the formation and augmentation of capital. They had capital in their hands. The conditions for capital is wage labor. They created the working class. Without the bourgeoisie, the working class doesn't exist. They had to bring them all together in cities, working at factories, doing menial labor, and getting garbage wages. Wage labor rests exclusively on the competition between the laborers. The advance of industry, whose involuntary promoter is the bourgeoisie, replaces the isolation of the laborer. So the bourgeoisie created the working class by bringing it together. Due to the competition by revolutionary combination, due to the association, the development of modern industry therefore cuts from under its feet the very foundation on which the bourgeoisie produces and appropriates products. What the bourgeoisie therefore produces above all are its own gravediggers. So he saw this irony built in the bourgeoisie, that it was calling together the wage laborers from all these different areas and putting them together in order to be more productive, and class consciousness was going to develop. And that was how there was going to be a revolution. It didn't happen though. Okay, so you had to have industrialization first before you had a revolution. That was Marx's idea. So please understand that Marx's revolution didn't take place anywhere. Okay, that's the shortcoming of Marx's theories, is that and he called it a utopian society. Once there was a revolution, there wasn't going to be any more class conflict. Instead, there was going to be a replacement of the bourgeoisie by the working class. They were going to seize the means of production, and there wasn't going to be any more of that dangerous exploitation going on, no more anger. Didn't happen, but there was all these bad things going down, and then this guy comes along, and boy, does he look like, grandpa. This is Keynes. This is Maynard Keynes. And when he comes along, he starts to explain what was going on, and then what was going on throughout the 19th century, but what also went down in the early part of the 20th century, because people didn't really understand it. And he writes this in 1923, I think, and he came up with a general theory, and I think it was around 1930, based on what he wrote here. This explains the thrust of Keynes and what he was doing. So let's take a look. So let's get rid of Marx. Change in the units has no effect. So let's see what Keynes is writing about when he gets in there. Okay, and again, take another sip of coffee. You'll be glad. And he starts off with some fairly basic notions. They're really easy to misunderstand. Money is only important for what it procures. Smith told you that. Smith is the beating heart of Keynes. But also Keynes is going to address the crisis that Marx brought up, that Marx knew was happening. All these crises of producing these different classes and then exploiting them and crashing down. So Keynes addresses that, or proposes an excellent mechanism of addressing it. But stick with me. I would love to tell you, but you're not ready yet. Okay, stick with me. Money is only important for what it procures. So money only matters for what it can buy. Okay, you can't do anything with a dollar bill, let alone a euro or anything else. You can't, do this or that or the other thing. It's only what you can buy with it. It's a means of exchange. That's what Smith wrote about, and Smith is going to be at the base of this. So thus a change in the monetary unit. So I could go from dollars, we could go to euros. And what Keynes is pointing out there is it doesn't make a difference. If we suddenly put zeros on all these $1 bills, we got tens, and we suddenly put 2 on, we got hundreds. If you did that to everybody's dollar bills, it would have no effect, okay, at all. Because what you would have given me yesterday for $1, once we put those zeros on that dollar bill and they're hundreds, you're going to ask for 100 instead. So the change in the monetary unit doesn't matter. Its effect is uniform across all the economy. Okay, so change in the unit does not matter. But this is absolutely essential, and this is where most people mix up things. It follows, therefore, that a change in the value of money, this is what will you give me for it, that is to say, in the level of prices, is important to society only insofar as its incidence is unequal. Okay, such changes have produced in the past and are producing now the vastest social consequences. This is why economics matters, because it makes massive changes in society. When you change the value, and this is going to be through inflation or deflation, and something I want to really pound into you is that when you have inflation, prices go up, duh, but the value of money is coming down. That's what's going on. When you have prices going up, the value is coming down. So what I used to buy with $5, say 5 years ago, I would, instead of giving you $5 now, I have to give you 10. So that $5 will only buy me half of what it used to, 10 years ago. So that's prices going up. The value of the unit is going down. The value, not the monetary unit. Still 5 is 5. Okay. So value goes down as prices go up. As prices come down, which is what most people think we want, I'm telling you right now, you don't. But that's called deflation. If the value of, something I spent $10 on, 10 years ago, suddenly if there's deflation going on, I only have to give you 5 now to get the same thing. That's in the value. The value has gone up as the price comes down. Deflation is a marker of increase in the value of the monetary unit. Okay? So deflation, when prices come down, value goes up. When prices go up, value comes down. So as you hear about inflation, it's a devaluing of the currency. And people have the mistaken notion that they want the value of the currency to go up. Hold tight. You're going to hear why that is goofy. But let's go to 3. Fluctuations in the value of money since 1914 have been on a scale so great as to constitute, with all that they involve, one of the most significant events in the economic history of the modern world. What you've seen since 1914 is the primary thing is everybody thinks World War I. Well, what you saw was the governments were producing vast quantities of money to procure arms and weaponry and other things. What they were doing was producing enormous amounts of money, which increases the supply of it, just like everything else. When you increase the supply, you bring the value down. Okay? If everybody has a Mercedes, suddenly Mercedes come down in value. I don't want, give me a break. Those are more common than Kias, okay? So when you produce something at a higher rate, what you do is actually devalue it, okay? When it becomes more rare, it becomes more valuable, okay? Money works just like everything else. So when the governments were producing it, enormous amounts of money to procure arms and such like that, you were seeing inflation kick in. But when governments were getting knocked out, like which was happening in World War I, you were seeing money being wiped out, and suddenly it became very dear. Instead, what you had was prices coming down and value going up. And so you were seeing these fluctuations happening with World War I. And governments producing or not producing large quantities of money and creating havoc on the monetary markets. So this is very important. Each process, inflation and deflation alike. I know people want to choose me or him. Me or him? Nah, you don't want to do that. This is not the dating game. Has inflicted great injuries. Each has an effect in altering the distribution of wealth between the different classes. That's the problem. Inflation in this respect being the worst of the two. Now, be careful. You might go, aha, Pendleton doesn't know what he's talking about. It's inflation that's the problem. Well, no, Pendleton doesn't know what he's talking about, but inflation's not the problem, because, hold on tight. What inflation affects is the distribution between the classes, okay? But each has also an effect on overstimulating or retarding the production of wealth, though here deflation is more injurious. Very important thing to keep in mind, okay? Number one, I should point out that gold and silver have not worked. They didn't work during World War I. They still don't work. They don't be one of those not so bright people who says we should go back to the gold standard. Why don't you go back to the gold standard and the rest of us are perfectly fine? It didn't work. Okay, we were off it. Long story in the early 70s, but we were off it before then. The effects of inflation affect distribution of wealth. Where is it going? Upper classes, lower classes? That really knocks things off in distribution. Deflation hits production. Okay, it hits production. That means you're not losing ground to the wealthier folks and falling behind. And you're out of a job. That's where deflation hits. It hits hard in that aspect. That's what he's pointing out. So it's not a matter of choosing your beauty queen, either inflation or deflation. Neither one. Okay? So stick with me. So Keynes comes back to what Marx talked about to a degree, but in a different way. Comes back to classes. And he talks about an investment class, talks about a business class, and an earning class. It's not so simple as bourgeoisie and proletariat. Didn't work, Carl, nice try. But he identified the crisis. He didn't identify the fact that people behave in different manners depending on where they're situated. This is what he's going to do here. Okay, now watch what he does. This is paragraph 7 here. Let's go through this, running up to paragraph 7, blah, blah, blah. Under this phase of capitalism, he's going to talk about the investment class, how it was created. Let me get myself out of the way. As developed during the 19th century, many arrangements were devised for separating the management of property from its ownership. These arrangements were of 3 leading types. Really, I'm going to talk about 2. Those in which the property, while parting with the management of his property, retained his ownership of it. Now, you might be sitting there going, well, this was kind of a new development of the 19th century. I might own a house, but you know what? I'm not going to live in it. That's a house I own out in Irvine or something like that. What I'll do is I will rent it out, and I'm tired of dealing with renters. They're such a problem. I just want to retire and hang out and live in Florida. I will hire a management company to do it for me, and they'll send me money. every month or so. That is the separation of the property class from the management class. That's what it is. Okay, those in which the property, while parting with the management of his property, retained his ownership of it, of the actual land, buildings, and machinery. I still own the deed. Okay, this mode of tenure being typified by holding an ordinary shares of a joint stock company. That's basically what it is, and it saturates throughout society. I have money, and if I buy a chunk of your company through investment, if I go to the stock market and buy a big, $100,000 in stock in this widget company, but I let you run the company, then I'm the investment class, you're the management class. Same thing if our roles are reversed. If you buy the stock, you're in the investment class position, and I'm in the management class because I'm actually doing the work. But I don't own this company, okay? You do. Now, it's very important to understand one of the aspects of Keynes's classes is that you can occupy more than one class simultaneously. Marx didn't foresee that. Keynes did. Okay, but what he's going to talk about is the division of the investment class and the development of stability assumption. Okay, and that's on paragraph 11. Let's jump up a little bit. People started to assume, okay, but he said during the 19th century they developed a new and increased importance. They added, by the beginning of the 20th century, divided the property class into groups, the businessmen and the investors, with partly divergent interests. So I'm interested in, my own self-interest is in, if I buy stocks, I want to see return on the value of my money that I invested in you. You as the manager want to make sure that your company keeps producing more money, and you're going to keep working on it and going at it, but I want to see the value of my stock go up. Slightly different but going in the same direction interests. You're going to see these work somewhat differently under different conditions. Okay, but we have our own, our own interests. So the atmosphere thus created a well-harmonized demand of expanding business and the need of an expanding population with the growth of a comfortable non-business class. That's the investment class. They were created out of Smith. Smith's basic supply and demand and expanding capitalism and all that meant that some people just said, well, you go do the work, here's $100,000 to do what you want with, just give me back money every now and then. Okay. But amidst the general enjoyment and ease of progress, the extent to which the system depended on the stability of the money to which the investing class had committed their fortune was generally overlooked. This is very important because people just kind of assumed money was a dollar's worth a dollar. No, it's not. This is where Smith walks back into Keynes. It's worth what you will exchange me for it. It's supply and demand. People assumed and built on this new model that went on during the 19th century that money was stable, that you wouldn't get periods of rapid inflation or rapid deflation or collapse periods. You wouldn't get these expansive, 100 to 200, as we see in some countries, 800% inflation rates, which degrade the production of money. Or deflation, which collapses production. It wipes it out. What you saw with World War I is that you started that assumption no longer kicked in, no longer took place. That assumption was shown to be an assumption, not the reality. Okay, and let me talk about a little bit about this. So that was there was a development of what he called a gradual inflation. Moreover, the progressive deterioration of value in money through history is not an accident, but it had planned behind it two great driving forces: the impecuniosity of governments and the superior political influence of debtor class. This seems really abstract, but think about it this way. If I, borrow a ton of money and I owe, like the government does, $100,000, and I'm like, oh man, how am I ever going to get out of this? If the value of that money goes down and there's a lot more money around tomorrow, it's going to be easier to pay off that debt. And that's the effect of inflation. If you've had, 10 years of 10% inflation, suddenly that $100,000 is about as easy to pay off as $50,000. It's not easier to pay off. So an inflation rate makes it easier to pay off debts 5, 10, 20 years from now than it is on the day they were incurred. If you can have some type of inflation, it makes it easier to pay off debts. So the debtor class and then governments spending too much kind of kept a moderate, inflation rate going, just kept it going. That's kind of cool. Okay. So the war's effects scattered things. Okay. Sometimes it collapsed governments. Sometimes governments went crazy and just printed off their own money. So the war kind of messed things up and the emperor has no clothes. Okay. So let's go to this one, business classes. And this is on the windfalls on 27. You're going to see echoes of Marx and Smith throughout this. And then he talks about the war in 22. Let me jump up to 27 because he comes to another class called the business class. Okay, he says it's long been recognized by the business world and economists alike that a period of rising prices acts as a stimulus to enterprise and is beneficial to businessmen. In the first place, there is an advantage which is the counterpart to the loss of investment class, which we just have examined. When the value of money falls, it is evident that those persons who have engaged to pay fixed sums of money yearly out of the profits of active business must benefit. Okay, since their fixed money outgoings will bear a smaller portion than the formerly to their money turnover. Now that's ouch, but let's do this. If I come knocking to you and say, hey, I will give you this $100,000 to set up a Taco Bell on the corner of Apple Valley Road and Bear Valley Road if you give me $10,000 every year. Okay, I'll pay you that if you give me back $10,000 every year out of your profits. And you say, sure, I'll set up me a Taco Bell. I need me some Taco Bell. Why not? Well, if inflation starts kicking in, that $10,000 gets easy to pay back because you know what? The price of burritos went up from $1 to $2 to $10, and suddenly it's easier to pay off that fixed amount. Notice that the business class benefits from inflation. The investment class gets hurt. If we have a preset agreement, the investment class gets hurt by inflation. The business class benefits. Why does it happen? Because the business class pays out, buys things. I'm going to buy this many beans and that many tortillas at this price, but I'm going to sell them a week, 2 weeks, 5 weeks from now at a higher price because the inflation is kicking in. So what Keynes points out there is that there is a windfall, and he echoes Marx. And this is in 27. If you go to 27, paragraph 27, he says, but if the depreciation of money, that is inflation, is a source of gain to the businessman, that's the businessman, not in the investment class, it is also the occasion of opprobrium. To the consumer, the businessman's exceptional profits appear as the cause and instead the consequence of the hated rise in prices. He starts talking about the resentment of people looking at the businessman and saying, man, that's easy money. Okay, get your money for nothing and all that. Wasn't there a song like that? But anyway, you make easy money too easy when you have outrageous inflation. Okay, that's what he's pointing out. Okay, so outrageous inflation helps the businessman, be more productive, and he really goes at it, or she goes at it, because you buy low and then you wait a couple months and then you sell much higher, and it depends on how long your turnover is. But the longer your turnover, the bigger your profits, and just off of the inflation rate. It's that easy. Okay. So, and then he goes into 28, he goes into the resentment that gets together, and this is him building and making folks aware that what Marx was talking about was real. Okay. To the earner, he points out, let me point out what the earner, wages lag behind inflation. And I got to go kind of fast here. You might, if you're paid $5 an hour, you're going to be paid $5 an hour, even if the inflation rate is degrading that wage. You might get a pay increase every 3 to 6 to 12 months, but it's not going to keep up with inflation if the inflation rate is high. Okay, that's the degrading of the value for the earner, for the working class. Okay, and so what Keynes has done is pointed out the different effects that these, that inflation and deflation have on the different people. If you have deflation, it really, for the investment class, and let me bring down here, for the investment class, if you just hold on to your money, don't put it in the stock market, and there's deflation, that means prices are coming down, and I've got $100,000, prices are coming down. If I just hold on to my money and don't give it to anybody to run their business, I suddenly have a more valuable commodity if I hold on to it and bury it in my mattress and don't tell anybody about it. It's more valuable 6 months or a year from now than if I try to invest it. Okay, that's what happens. That's why you want the investor to invest. You want them to not hold on to their money. You cannot. Deflation will crush investment. It will make investors hold on to all their capital. It kills capitalism. That's what deflation does. I know people think that prices coming down is a great thing, but to the investor, when prices are coming down, they start grabbing their money and saying, I'm going to hold on to it, because just by holding on to my money, it becomes more valuable. Okay, so deflation crushes capitalism. Okay, inflation actually works against the earner. That suddenly my $5 an hour isn't going to get increased at the rate of inflation. I can't keep up. And it creates a bigger disparity between the classes. And what he does is he points out in the B section in 37, he points out that neither extreme is good. Okay, what you want, and on 37 he says, if for some reason, right or wrong, the business world expects that prices will fall, the process of production tends to be inhibited. So if I think prices are going to fall, I'm going to shut down that local Taco Bell. I'm going to hold on to my money. I'm going to, shut this shop down because prices are coming down. I'm going to lose money. Okay, and the investors are going to pull their money out of the business because I'm buying tortillas and I put out, $100,000 in expenses, but when I sell it next week, I'm only going to get 80,000. I'm not going to make money. I'm the businessman, and the investment class, I'm not going to put my money in there. I'm going to hold on to my $100,000 because if I hold on to it, it's going to increase in value. Okay, because deflation's kicking in. Just the expectation. Okay, a fluctuation in the measuring rod of value does not alter in the least the wealth of the world. So if you change the monetary unit, it doesn't make a difference, or the productive capacity of the world. It ought therefore not therefore to affect the character or the volume of what is produced. Okay, let me see. Movement of relative prices, that is to say the comparative prices of different commodities, ought to influence the character of production because it is an indication of the various commodities are not being produced in exactly the right proportion. That is what is incredibly important. If there is a change in prices, it says you should be producing more, you should be producing less. That's the information that's so important that Hayek made a big deal out of. But inflation and deflation affect the different classes differently. Okay, that's what Keynes is pointing out. It affects them differently, and you have to be aware of that. And what he kind of wraps up with, and what I want to wrap up with, is this on 41 and 42. Okay, I'll just go ahead and jump to 42 because, boy, this is a long video, and hopefully you're not still sleeping. What do we do about it? Paragraph 42 tells you exactly kind of what you got to do about it. The best way to cure this moral disease of individualism must be to provide that there shall never exist any confident expectation either that prices generally are going to fall or that they are going to rise, and also that there should be no serious risk that a movement, if it does occur, will be a big one. That's it. That right there, paragraph 42, that's Keynes, and that's monetary policy. That's the Federal Reserve. Okay, how do you affect that to make sure there's no increase in inflation or deflation? What you do is make sure that the banks are either able to lend out more money by lowering interest rates, they can give up more, or you say, hey, banks, knock up that interest rate. Okay, instead of doing it at 4%, we're going to knock it up to 4.5. And we're going to make it tougher for banks to loan out money. That's the supply of money. Okay? So if banks have a harder time that they can't loan out money so much, you just made money more valuable. That's what you do. So if everybody knows the Federal Reserve will act, will jump on inflation or deflation if either of them kick in at too much of a level. At either, you don't want deflation ever to kick in because the investment class will pull their cash out. Okay? But you also don't want to have 12 to 13 to 25% inflation. And back in my day, I remember inflation at 16%. And I remember scratching price tags off of peanut butter jars because they kept changing the price throughout the week. You don't want it that high. How they brought inflation down was make it hard to loan money. They raised the interest rates, they jacked up the interest rates like crazy, and that made it very hard to borrow money. That made money more valuable. Okay? So, and that made it tougher to produce. When inflation was high, everybody was very productive, but it really wore down the earning class. So what Keynes said is that there must be a monetary policy for the governments to pay attention to money values, not money just, units. So they shouldn't decide, euros, dollars, yens, whatever. They should decide instead, well, we've got an 8% inflation rate right now. That's a little high. Let's actually put the brakes on how much money is loaned out and actually require that the banks not loan out money below this interest rate. So it's harder for people to borrow money. That will control the supply of money. Okay? So what Keynes points out to really address the crises that were going on that Marx was talking about, no revolution, okay? Because Keynes was a dyed-in-the-wool capitalist. He said to preserve the capitalist, to preserve the investment class, you must ensure that you don't get radical deflation or radical inflation that would hurt the earning class. You don't want deflation, which will cause the investment class to grab its money. You want them to invest their money. So they will invest their money if there's a constant rate of inflation. If there's a constant decent rate, okay, about 2% inflation, so that you don't like sitting on your money because it's going to constantly degrade gradually. But we don't want a rapid rate of inflation. We want to control it somewhere in between. And so the Federal Reserve puts the brakes or hits the gas on, the lending based on what they see in the inflation and deflation numbers. They want to keep it around 2% is where they have it. So that, I will wrap up Keynes. So that was a little bit long, but that's how Keynes is built to address the Marxist crisis, and it uses Smith to address the fact that money is a commodity like anything else. But it says, well, don't let it float. Instead, get in there and make sure you don't have too much inflation or too much deflation. And that's what central banks do, is they try to control the interest rate, the inflation rate, so it doesn't go too high and that it doesn't trigger deflation and you go to the other extreme. That's Keynes. Okay, folks? So I'm sorry that lecture was a little bit long, but now you've got it. Now you understand how the Federal Reserve works to control the supply of money by hitting by hitting interest rates where the banks let out more or less money. Okay? All right, take care, you guys. If you made it through that, I salute you with my coffee cup. Take care. All right, bye-bye.